So something crazy happened today. I had a sudden flood of commenters commenting on one video in particular that I made several months ago, right? But the weird part is that all of these commenters misunderstood my argument in the exact same way. That's strange. I mean, nobody made these objections before and the video's been up for months now. If I didn't know any better, I would think that these commenters were letting someone else do the thinking for them instead of thinking for themselves. Or maybe a more probable explanation is that Cosmic Skeptic did a response to one of my videos and some of his fans got overly excited and commented without thinking it through first. But who knows? I don't know. I guess it may just be one of those great mysteries. Maybe I'll never know. So it seems like Cosmic Skeptic made a video response to one of my videos last night. Now, I know what you're thinking, that he responded to my series on the Bible and slavery that I did in response to his video, right? Well, not quite. Instead, his video was in response to an older video of mine where I responded to Hemet Meta on the topic of God and kids with cancer. Now, I'm not a hater, so I'll admit that was a pretty smart move because that video is probably the most emotionally charged video that I've ever done on this channel aside from slavery. A topic like that already gives him the emotional advantage before anybody hears a single word that I say. It's one of those things where people will intuitively and emotionally agree with Cosmic Skeptic's position in advance. So I gotta give him props. Not a bad move, Cosmic. Well played. Anyways, I sure do love making response videos, and today seems like a pretty good day to do one. I'm even more excited because without a doubt, Cosmic is one of my favorite YouTube atheists on YouTube today. But the bad news is, he gonna learn today. So his video is about 22 minutes long, so if I played his entire video, then that would only leave me with about 10 minutes to keep the video at a reasonable length. So instead, I'll just have to divide it into parts once again. So here's part one, and I'm all ready to get into it. The only question now is, are you guys ready? Then let's go!
How's it going, everyone? It's Cosmic Skeptic, and I'm glad to be making one of my old style response videos again. It's been a while and I'm just in the mood for it. Just a reminder, I'll be speaking at events in London, Winchester and Israel soon. Links are all in the description, of course. Now, the reason that I'm inspired to make a response video is that I recently came across an attempted defense of the idea that a loving God might allow children to get cancer that seems so flawed to me that I couldn't resist making this video pointing out why I think this. And for a long time I've actually been meaning to take on the problem of evil and suffering more generally and make a kind of long and comprehensive video discussing the topic. And I still plan on maybe doing so, but this particular attempt to defend a loving God allowing kids to get cancer screamed particular urgency to me. This attempt comes from a Christian channel called Whaddo, whose owner's name is John, and is part of a series in which John is responding to some arguments from the atheist Hemet Meta. Now, I know John has made a response to one of my videos in the past, to my video about slavery, but responding to that will take some more time to prepare. I'm sure I'll get around to it eventually, but please do note that I'm aware of the video, just to prevent you from going off about it in the comments. For now though, let's see where this discussion leads us. Should we believe that a loving God would allow children to get cancer? Well, let's hear what John has to say.
What argument do we have today that proves that God does not exist? What argument are we going to consider today that proves that God does not exist? Let's go ahead and hear it. Hit me. No, I meant hit me with the next objection.
Pediatric cancer.
Okay, that was a very short argument. Let's hear it again.
Pediatric cancer.
I think I got this one. So the argument is, because I can't think of any good reason why God would allow children to have cancer, therefore there couldn't possibly be a good reason, right?
Wrong, actually. That's not necessarily the argument Hemet is going for. Clearly, Hemet is framing the argument rhetorically, so it's hard to know precisely what his version of the argument is. But we have to note something important here. Hemet is, of course, bringing up what's known as the problem of evil. The famous question, how can evil exist if there is a loving God who is all-powerful? Now, crucially, something John fails to acknowledge is that the problem of evil comes in two different forms: the logical problem and the evidential problem of evil, as they're generally known.
And we're already off to a bad start. So let's be clear here so you know what's going on. So Hemet's original video, the one that I was responding to, was called 20 Short Arguments Against God's Existence. And the most basic and lay way that I can think of a way to explain what an argument is that arguments are given when someone has something that they're trying to demonstrate and they give reasons in support of it. So his video was called 20 Short Arguments Against the Existence of God. So what Hemet was trying to show, or his conclusion, was that God does not exist. On the point that I was responding to, the reasons that he gave in support of his conclusion that God doesn't exist was only 2 words: pediatric cancer. And that was it.
Pediatric cancer.
So clearly, Hemet wasn't trying to give a robust philosophical argument. It seemed to me that he was just giving a rhetorical layman's argument, something that someone on the streets would say. So how did I respond in the quick clip that we just saw? Well, I just did the same. I gave him a rhetorical layman's answer. Simple. Neither of us are trying to give rigorous philosophical arguments. My subscribers, by and large, aren't philosophers, and neither are his, so it seemed appropriate. But even more, that was just how I started off my video. As my video went on, I said that I would improve Hemet's argument by making it stronger than it actually is. And I did that by putting it in the strongest format that I'm aware of, which made it a lot more logically consistent. But we'll get to that soon enough. But just to give you guys a quick heads up, this next part of Cosmic Skeptic's response is a bit dry and academic, but try to stay with me throughout this because we're going to get to the good stuff soon enough, all right? Let's keep it moving.
Now, failing to distinguish between these 2 types means that he might be responding to a totally different argument, not the one being made by Hemet. So we need to understand the difference between these 2 versions to really understand which version Hemet's making and whether John's criticism of the argument holds up. So in order to understand the difference between these 2 versions of the problem of evil, we have to first get to grips with the difference between 2 broader categories of arguments in general: inductive arguments and deductive arguments. In inductive arguments, the premises point towards a conclusion, offering evidence to support it, but don't logically require that the conclusion must be true. In deductive arguments, the conclusion does logically follow from the premises, such that if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Well, here are 2 examples to help explain. First, a deductive argument. Premise 1, all cats are black. Premise 2, Tom is a cat. Conclusion, Tom is black.
Yo, why Tom gotta be a black cat? Why can't he just be a cat?
Tom is black. Tom is black. Tom is black. Tom is black.
I'm kidding. Let's just keep going.
As you can see, the conclusion logically follows from the premises. There's no way in which the premises can both be true and the conclusion be false. Of course, the premises can be false, as they are here, meaning the argument isn't sound, but that doesn't affect its logical validity. It's deductive because if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. So when it comes to deductive arguments, they can only be debunked by arguing that at least one premise is false. By contrast, and for comparison, here's an inductive argument. Premise 1, all cats that have ever been observed are black. Premise 2, Tom is a cat. Conclusion, therefore, Tom is black. As you can see, this is a very similar argument with an identical conclusion, in fact. But this conclusion is not logically required by the premises. It's perfectly possible for both of the premises to be true and yet the conclusion be false, which you'll remember was impossible for a deductive argument. And that's the difference. Now, the thing to note is that inductive arguments aren't bad arguments for this reason. They can be incredibly convincing. For instance, consider a very similar argument to the one I just presented. Premise 1, all tangerines that have ever been observed are orange. Conclusion, all tangerines are orange. The conclusion doesn't logically follow from this premise. It could easily be false, since we might discover a uniquely purple tangerine at some point in the future. But if you do believe that all tangerines are orange, as most people do, then you're convinced by this argument, even though, logically speaking, the conclusion could well be false. So, in a deductive argument, the conclusion must be true if the premises are true, and in an inductive argument, the premises support the conclusion and offer evidence in favor of it, but don't logically require it. I'll leave some more information on the difference between these types of arguments in the description. But with that understood, let's unpack the 2 forms of the problem of evil, which are generally known, as I say, as the logical form and the evidential form. The logical problem of evil is a deductive argument, which, as we've seen, means that it claims that if its premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. The logical argument goes something like as follows. Premise 1. If an all-loving, all-powerful God exists, evil would not exist. Premise 2. Evil exists. Conclusion, therefore, an all-loving, all-powerful God does not exist. Now this is a fairly surface level version of the logical problem of evil, but you can see it's a deductive argument. If both of these premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Those who support the logical problem of evil, therefore, believe that they can prove that God does not and cannot exist. So now we can talk about the other version, the evidential problem of evil. The difference with this is that the evidential problem is inductive. Instead of claiming that it's logically impossible for a loving God to exist if evil exists, it claims that it's unlikely or not a good explanation of the evidence available to us. It doesn't logically follow from the existence of evil that God does not exist, but we should consider evil to be at least a good reason to doubt God's existence.
Hold up, pause right there. Now, what's wrong with the argument on his screen? Now, although I'm happy to see Cosmic is teaching his subscribers philosophy, I really am, the only problem is that none of what he just said is really relevant at this point. At this point, I haven't even attempted to get into philosophy, and Hemet certainly didn't with his two-word argument.
This is in the same way that all observed tangerines being orange doesn't prove that all of them are orange, but it provides good reason to believe so anyway. So now consider Hemet's argument.
Pediatric cancer.
Which version does it seem that he is presenting?
I'm not sure that anyone could say one way or another, given that he literally only presented us with two words. The most obvious conclusion is that he isn't presenting a philosophical argument at all. So it looks like a false dichotomy to me, homeboy.
Well, it seems to me that Hemet is getting at the evidential problem of evil, the inductive version.
Now, what's funny about this is that Cosmic Skeptic seems to claim that I'm guilty of interpreting Hemet wrong, even though Hemet clearly didn't give us much to go off of, while Cosmic Skeptic just assumes that Hemet really is trying to make an entire philosophical argument from the evidential problem of evil. I mean, what sounds more probable to you? If someone is literally given a two-word argument,
Pediatric cancer.
is it more likely that they're trying to give a philosophically rigorous and a complex philosophical argument that most people aren't familiar with? Or is it more probable that he's just making a layman's argument for rhetorical purposes? You tell me. All right, so Cosmic really is assuming a lot here, especially since Hemet didn't give a single philosophical argument for the other 19 arguments in his video. They were obviously not intended to be philosophically rigorous, or he wouldn't have put 20 arguments in a 2-minute video. So the burden would lie with Cosmic at this point. I don't think that I was wrong for assuming that it was a layman's argument that wasn't intended to be philosophically rigorous, because I took in consideration the context of Hemet's entire video, which didn't have a single thing that was philosophically rigorous. But if it was wrong for me to assume, which it could have been, then Cosmic Skeptic is far, far more wrong than me, because not only did he assume something far, far greater than I did, but he assumed something that wasn't even evidenced by anything else that Hemet said in the video. Now, I just can't wait to hear how else he justifies this point. Let's see.
Well, it seems to me that Hemet is getting at the evidential problem of evil, the inductive version, because his example, pediatric cancer, is an example of severe and powerful suffering, but doesn't reference logical inconsistency.
Let me make sure I get this right. So, it must be the evidential version of the philosophical problem of evil because it doesn't reference logical consistency. It seems to me that even if Cosmic is right here and we're certain that he's referencing the philosophical arguments, then it would be just as possible that he was referring to either one of them. It could have been evidential or logical. I genuinely don't see from how those two words we can infer that it was one over the other. And here I was thinking it was just the Christians who were supposed to be making arguments from silence. Maybe I'm missing something, but that seems like a heck of a conclusion to arrive at based off of no evidence.
Instead, it seems that Hemet is just providing a good reason to doubt that a loving God exists. If this is the case, then when John says,
So the argument is, because I can't think of any good reason why God would allow children to have cancer, therefore there couldn't possibly be a good reason.
he's actually characterizing a completely different argument.
And unfortunately, it looks like we're still stuck on literally my very first sentence in response in the video. Even worse, that means that everything that he just said was quite literally irrelevant to my point. But here's where it gets even worse. Now, up until this point in the video, not only do I see him getting me wrong, but he also seems to be getting Hemet wrong. If Cosmic Skeptic is just assuming that Hemet was trying to make a rigorous philosophical argument, then that's a massive insult to Hemet, because that would instantly qualify Hemet as the literal worst philosophical argument presenter in the entire universe. I mean, if those 20 arguments in his video were attempts at being philosophically rigorous arguments, that would be the most non-rigorous, logically invalid, and unsophisticated arguments in the history of all of philosophy. Literally, ever. If that's the case, then he makes Snooki look like Kant. But if it's how Cosmic Skeptic thinks it is, then it seems that on the face of it, I have far more respect for Hemet than Cosmic Skeptic does. Instead, I give Hemet a lot more credit because I think that he would actually agree with me that his intent was not to make philosophical arguments, but just to make rhetorical or layman arguments. Tell me what you think down below. Well, that does it for part 1, but make sure you have notifications turned on because you don't want to miss part 2, because in my mind, we haven't even got started yet. And lastly, today I actually reached out to my new homeboy and I asked him, the next time that someone says,
Well, it seems to me that Hemet is getting at the evidential problem of evil.
what should I say?
What do you meme?
Yeah!